Hi, I'm Dr. George J. Seig. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico, and I'm also a historian of religion specializing in esotericism. I also investigate new religious movements, particularly minority religions developing in situations or circumstances of change and uncertainty. One of the movements that I've investigated recently is generally referred to as the sinister tradition. This grew out of the culture of Satanism and is generally classified as a left-hand path religious movement, which involves a focus on separation from and opposition to consensus forms and social norms, and often involves the embrace of identification with antagonist figures. This tradition also developed in contrast to the formulation of what's generally now called modern Satanism by Anton LaVey in 1966, who eventually expressed Satanism as an atheistic philosophy of indulgence and rational self-interest. Since that time, various esoteric currents within the culture of Satanism began to advance a concept of a left-hand path that embraced a much greater diversity of views about the nature of the opposer or adversary, be it Satan, the devil, Lucifer, or otherwise. In this case, it's definitely otherwise. I'm here interviewing, here in Oklahoma City, interviewing Dastur Adam Daniels of the Dakhma of Angra Mainyu. This is the first new religious movement to develop within the milieu of Satanism, which focuses on the figure of Ahriman, the original expression of the diabolical archetype in archaic Iran and developing through ancient Persia, eventually inspiring the Hebrews who encountered this concept during the Babylonian exile of the Jews to diabolize their own figure, Satan. So, in summary, this new religious movement has reached back to the original, most archaic roots of the concept of the devil in order to reconstruct a practice of devil worship within the context of contemporary Satanism. So, I feel very privileged and honored to have the chance to interview Dastur Daniels on the night before the highly controversial and publicized Black Mass, which will be held tomorrow, September 21st, 2014, at the Oklahoma City Civic Center. So I'm going to be asking a number of questions about the nature of the group, its beliefs, its practices, and this will hopefully be of interest to other scholars within the academic study of Satanism and generally the emergent field of left-hand path studies and how it relates to the development of minority religions. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you how large is your group? How many people are actually involved in this practice of what you call Ahrimanic tradition?
Like I said before, here locally there's about 14 people. Core group stands at about 9, but online we got around 60.
And where are these 60 people located?
All throughout the world. We have a good base in England, Germany, France, and Siberia, believe it or not.
Siberia?
Yeah.
How many people are in Siberia?
We've got one guy who functions with us online, but he's running a group of 5.
So is it common that the individuals who communicate with you online also have their own local group?
We try to enforce that appeal. Their main stance is on Malik House personally, because they're surrounded by a lot of Muslims. So for them, the adversarial archetype for Malik House stands stronger than, say, Ahriman.
So when you say adversarial archetype, what are you referring to? How would you characterize this figure?
Malik House or Ahriman?
Well, the idea of the adversary. How is this important to your work?
Well, I don't like using the term adversary for our gods. I use the term anti-cosmic or anti-theatical. You use the term adversary, that can be very dumbed down, especially in an atheist concept. And we are anything but atheist. So I usually use the term anti-theatical. And to me, the concept of the antithesis is to deconstruct, destroy anything that is created by the theatical force.
Can you say more about that force that you oppose?
Well, for example, any force that involves the enslavement of mankind through morality or religious dogma or anything of that effect, or anything that is identified with it, we identify it as a Horror Mazda, and also identify it as Zermon. And as far as we are concerned, the way that the universe will be completely destroyed is an embrace between the twin brothers that Zermon created. But we believe that if the embrace is taken properly, that explosion will destroy Zermon and Ahriman will be left standing.
So, when you say you're anti-cosmic, does that mean you oppose this universe? Do you oppose cosmic order?
We oppose the current cosmic order that is in control of reality.
And so you want to see it ended?
I want to see it destroyed and remade.
So you have that in common then with the Zoroastrian tradition. But I assume that you want to see a different outcome than the Zoroastrian tradition.
I would prefer the dominance of Father Ahriman due to the concept of free will being balanced by self-responsibility.
So you say you also oppose morality. Do you instead favor immorality in the Nietzschean sense?
No, I believe that people should find their own morality and listening to another man to dictate to them what the morality is and how we establish it as sort of a mirror test. If you do something that's considered immoral and you can look yourself in the mirror and file it, continue. Excuse me, if you do something that you find amoral and you're guilty and you feel bad when you look in the mirror, you probably shouldn't do it again.
So what would reality be like if the current cosmic order was destroyed?
Good question. Have you seen the movie In the Mouth of Madness?
Yes, I have.
All right. So if you take the concept of the collective understanding, the collective consciousness, and you replaced it with another form, all right, our ideal, like for example, his horror novels is what became reality. So if we were to take the Ahriman way, and it became the more popular thing that became reality, there would be a shift and a disruption and a recreation of that reality.
And what would it be like then?
For me to be ideal versus, I mean, I'm not quite sure.
Well, what kind of new reality would you like to see? Is it different for every Ahrimanic practitioner, or is there something common to the Ahrimanic reality that all practitioners?
I think, honestly, the common thing between all the Ahrimanic practitioners is we want to see the downfall of man. We want to see man destroy itself.
So you're anti-humanists?
Very much so.
Do you want to replace humanity with something different or better?
I think humanity needs to have a shock. I think there needs to be enough destroyed so that humanity can review itself and reestablish its own personal way.
So you don't seek the complete destruction of humanity, just a change in its character?
To put it to you this way, as the Nazis tried to destroy all the Jews, I believe that we should allow the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims to destroy themselves in their own stupidity.
How does that relate to the destruction of humanity in general?
Because if we push that direction, that would take care of, I would say, the majority of the world's populace.
And what about what's left?
I guess we're going to learn to live with each other and completely humanity.
So, does that mean that the feature of humanity that you most oppose is monotheism?
I wouldn't say it's monotheism in general. It is the concept of one man has this corrupt power over all these men, and they're using religion as a way to brainwash and maintain that control. That's my guess.
see humanity in general as particularly susceptible to those forms of control?
Yes, a vast majority of people would rather give in, allow it to move and control things for them instead of standing up for themselves. Because it's easier to go along with the pack, it's easier to follow the priest, it's easier to follow the imam and what everybody else around them is doing. Because usually those who go against this type of behavior are usually killed, or they get real crafty real quick about being able to stay alive.
So what kind of changes would you like to see cultivated in humanity in order to oppose the kinds of social control that you're talking about?
The concept of lex talionis should really be brought back into modern society. I honestly think that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, kill for a kill should be brought back, because it would bring back a lot more respect amongst human beings. Because if I have the right to kill you, or I have the right to take your eye, or I have the right to take your hand for stealing from me, and I will go through with making it happen, I will gain a lot more respect, and people will be less likely to do stupid shit to one another.
So how else would society differ in a world where Ahrimanic tradition was more influential?
I think yes. I think the society would be a lot more respectful. I think there would be a lot more education on things that matter versus just crap people have to memorize. And I think that people would be able to work together, not only to attain their own personal goals, but goals as groups or goals as a mass populace that are in tune with what everybody's doing. Because it seems like to me, in general society, people are all aligned to one purpose, but at the same time they're all vying for their own selfish needs. And that's where all the bullshit and conflict starts. But if your needs are already fulfilled, and the society's needs are already fulfilled, then everybody would be more attentive to work cohesively together if they had a respect for one another and to maintain their own civility to attain their goals.
So what kind of goals do you see as desirable for people to collaborate on in a better social circumstance?
Well, like, for example, one of our goals, if we can get a kickoff. After we get the mass, we'd like to get the church built. After we get the church built, get grants going, get things going, we would like to start another type of business, say a clothing store specifically to things that our culture would be nurtured to. Then a cult shop for supplies to do ritual, then a book shop, and things like a little Tokyo where we're making a little Dakhma area of the city, and to create that society from within. And with all those people within have everything they need, and they can prosper out into other communities.
And do you see that as a desirable model for communities in general?
Yes, I think the community as a whole need to return to the community that takes care of itself. All members take care of each other, whether it's through barter, whether it's through a money system, however it needs to be ran, but everybody is taking care of everybody on the inside, and everybody else on the outside is fair game. So if we can expand a church member base and move it into more of a societal base of a couple hundred people, we're all taking care of each other, and they're all working towards their own goals, promoting their business, feeding their families, working with the church, whatever it is that they got to do to make success in their life and empower and embolden themselves. That's more of a goal as a whole, so that there is a synchronicity amongst all the people in the faith to work together for the big goal.
So if that's your general model for what would make a desirable community, is there anything particular about the Ahrimanic tradition that would distinguish an Ahrimanic community from another effective and cohesive self-supporting community? Or do you see that feature as being the main focus of an Ahrimanic tradition?
I think once the thing is established in itself, it will want to move it to concrete, and a concrete will, of course, start the concept of destructive cycle. Because obviously, if you're going to want to take over the community, So wouldn't have to be destroyed like that. I think that'll be more akin to how Romans affected reality. Because if you look into the ideals of Steiner, he specifically says Rome is based on the Ahrimanic ideal, Greek was based on Luciferian. And I think the concept really of the Roman way, when it comes to how it took care of itself, it conquered it, took care of it, conquered it, took care of it, and we based everything in that module, I think that's what we should do.
So if there were multiple Ahrimanic communities, would they all cooperate in a kind of imperial way, or would they vie with each other until only one was left, and then try to conquer others?
That part B.
I see. So it's interesting to me that you mentioned Steiner's work. My doctorate is based on a thesis on occult warfare beliefs, which I wrote at the Exeter Center for the Study of Esotericism. And when I started this doctoral research, what I actually focused on was occult war beliefs and antagonist projections and basically dualistic demonology in the work of Rudolf Steiner. So I'm particularly interested to learn that that's a feature of your Ahrimanic tradition. How has the work of Steiner been an influence in your practice?
One of the major pieces, well, we usually start people in as with obviously the incarnation part, because it explains a lot about the scales of reality of evil of Luciferic entities versus the Ahrimanic entities. And those entities are at war along being at war with the three-tiered Christ. And we know we've already seen the Luciferic teachers, we've already seen the three-tiered Christ teachers, and we're waiting on the Ahrimanic teachers. Our part to do with that concept is how do we bring about that advent? How do we bring about that incarnation? And in our minds, in order to bring about that incarnation, we have to destroy the watchtower of reality to get him out to be incarnated. But when you go into spiritual warfare, and you're looking at it from the theosophic point of view, you have to make a lot of tweaks and inversions into how he works spiritual science and the meditation and spiritually actually communicating and dealing with the demons that are surrounding you. And a lot of that forceful projection, moving from the center point of the being and connecting through the subconscious mind with the entities themselves and being able to direct the energy through the collective consciousness in a hostile way takes a higher amount of energy from somebody who's trying to maintain a peaceful idea, but at the same time you still have to feel the entity and the target that you're aiming for.
So do you believe Steiner was correct that the incarnation of Ahriman will occur in America?
When you look into the parallels of the 30 Antichrists that go along with Nostradamus, and what Steiner was talking about in cohesiveness with the advent of Ahriman, I believe it's very much likely to happen because of the scientific, the secularism, along with the lead aspect of it in this country.
So the way Steiner describes an Ahrimanic world ultimately devolving into his description of the eighth planet or a kind of machine planet, is this what you see as desirable? So when you, for example, earlier talked about anti-humanism, do you foresee humanity being replaced by a more mechanical species?
I think the interpretation I get from it is you're talking about taking a human being and teaching that human being how to detach and how to objectify the things around him, so that it would seem more robotic or more automatic, because the feelings of what's going on is more analytical and logically regressed into my emotion is some type of alert that's telling me something needs to happen in order to stop the stimulus of emotion. Or it could be a demonic influence over whispering in my ears telling me something has to be done, but either way, it has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with logic. So if we're focusing strictly on a logical concept and bringing in the starvation aspect and the thirst aspect, and using the domination of I'm going to starve you until you're ready to do evil, or I'm going to make you thirsty until you're ready to do evil, and I'm going to pick at your bone, and I'm going to pick at your blood in order to force you into what it's not. I think it's going to be more robotic. I think you're going to have a lot of aversion straight into doing things in the logical logistics and moving away from the more spiritual and emotional aspects of it.
Now, I've encountered various research within the psychological field suggesting that a technologically advanced, highly urbanized society may actually be supportive of the development of psychopathy in individuals, which suggests a more objectifying approach. I've also encountered various left-hand path systems which seem to promote the development of the practitioner in a psychopathic direction. Do you see that as desirable? Do you see the psychopathic condition as something highly adaptive and something to be cultivated in humans?
I think you're taking it too far. Because once you move into a form of sociopathy, you no longer have that concept that goes within. You no longer have that concept. I guess we'll use the family module for metaphor. If you can't express your normal animal human emotions with the ones closest to you that are considered like the family module, then you're going to lose that piece of yourself and you're going to become something you can't control. You have to have the natural nurturing animal expressions with those that are closest to you, and you have to objectify those that are tools for you to operate on. So I do not say push yourself to the limits that you can't express your animal nature in that way, because you'd be going against your nature, but you still need to be able to say Johnny at the street is an object, he's a tool for me to manipulate, and he no longer serves his purpose anymore.
So you would see Steiner's description of a world completely devoid of empathy as being somewhat of a caricature, or being taken into extreme of a direction?
Yeah, I think he went too far, because as animals, we're going to maintain our animalistic nature. We can't purge that. And if we were to purge that, what's the point of it here? You see the right-hand path has been trying to purge that through stifling of the expression of those animal emotions. And that's usually what turns into serial killers. That's what turns into serial rapists, those who don't indulge in their natural animal instinct. And you also have to recognize that Steiner was specifically in the balanced aspect of the Buddhist still ideal. And if you were to take a Buddhist ideal and look upon the Ahrimanic aspect, I can see why he would see it as a sociopathic, completely apathetic, completely mechanical thing, because the love and the nurturing is only based for a small group around that person.
Now, you just mentioned this term, right-hand path. When I introduced our conversation, I mentioned my own interest in academic study of the left-hand path. As a practitioner, could you summarize what you see as the difference between these two paths?
Well, right-hand path, to boil it down, is they want to become a part of their God. They want to be, when they die, they want to go be consumed by their God. They want to go to heaven. They want to be essentially one with Jesus, whatever fucking prophet you want. Left-hand path is I don't want to be a part of anything but myself. I want to establish my own godhood and be responsible for everything about me.
So would you describe your own path as a path of self-deification?
I wouldn't say a self-deification. I would say a what is the term? A self-independent thing. I'm only dependent on myself to get everything done. I'm responsible for me. I make my own decisions. I deal with all the repercussions and everything else. And I want to be separated from the masses. I want to be separated from everybody who's hurrying off in that direction. That's why I don't really call ourselves a left-hand path. It's more of something in between, because we're trying to understand and maintain the animal balance of the human being, but still be able to use the traditional left-hand path tools on those who are without.
So, rather than being a path of separation from everything, you see your path as a rejection of union and the right-hand path, but also as a maintenance of your own natural state and perhaps your bonds of kinship or empathy with those who are within your fold.
Yes.
So, returning to the subject of Steiner, I also find it interesting that you focus on Steiner's work as a source for knowledge about Ahriman. My own familiarity with these mythologies comes from the master's research on original Zoroastrianism from the more archaic period in Iran. I was looking for evidence of the existence or continuity of a Daiva Yasna culture, or basically the ancient Iranian devil worshippers, or the possible veneration of Ahriman. Now, my understanding of the original Zoroastrian view of Angra Mainyu, the original of Ahriman, was that this is a purely spiritual principle of wickedness, which is set against material creation. But of course, by the time the Gnostic Manichaeans received the diabolical concept of Ahriman, it was inverted to make him a materialistic, physical world ruler, much more familiar to the Gnostic demiurge, kind of dark satanic demiurge. This seems to be how Steiner received him. So my question to you, as given that you're involved in the reconstruction of an Ahrimanic tradition, how do you deal with the differences between these sources, where, you know, in the older sources Ahriman is purely spiritual, in later sources he's purely material? What is your understanding of the nature of Ahriman?
Our understanding of the nature of Ahriman, and you're talking about the later deals when you're looking at Steiner, is you're basically what most people would, as corrupted through the years, whether I have to be considered evil materialism would be one thing that's considered good, because everyone's working towards it most of the time. And you see an inversion of what is considered right, wrong, good, ugly. What is the term they like to use, proper or improper? Personally, my workings with Ahriman is that it is a very powerful spiritual force dedicated to counter creation in order to create the proper destruction of what it feels is wrong, or what it feels is wrong or evil, not what most consider wrong or evil. So if the valley is for souls and the fight is for souls, what does it take to take away a soul from the war monster? And that's how I approach it. What does it take for a soul to be corrupted if it goes back to a war monster, where it's going to become an infection? Or what makes the soul so heavy that it falls off the Chinwal Bridge to where he gets to take it away from it? What, as a man or as a priest in his way, can do to remove the soul from a Yatus so that they can continue their journey moving forward in Ahriman's direction? And that's where I have a tendency to exist in. The material world that I live in is my problem, is what I have to deal with. Yes, I can call upon him for assistance to help me deal with these goals and create this reality, but in general, he is more worried about the spiritual aspects, and then what we do in reflection for him in the reality, he does in reflection for us in the spiritual.
So, in general, to me, your description of the nature of Ahriman does sound very similar to the anti-cosmic, counter-creating, angstful mind, which the original Zoroastrians diabolized. And yet, you said that you draw heavily on Steiner, whose view of Ahriman was much more materialistic, much more Gnostic. Why do you rely on Steiner?
We draw on Steiner's knowledge of spiritual science to go to work with entities, and we understand the fact that there needs to be an Ahriman teacher and another job to usher it in. Now, as far as his theory on what Ahriman is as a form of one who's going to force you to do evil through starvation or through thirst, we see that more of a war monster, the reflection of that particular thing.
So you're saying that there's a whole aspect of Steiner's view of Ahriman as a tyrannical material power, which you actually ascribe to his mythic opponent, Ahura Mazda.
Yes.
Now, how does Steiner's view of Lucifer play into all that?
In my think, how it appeals to me and it appears to me, you look at the concept of black magic that's been going on for a long time, and that concept is, I'm going to call down these angels, I'm going to call down this Christian power to protect me while I summon this demon and force this demon to do what I want. And that's usually dealing with the Luciferic thing, because the Luciferic wants to control you through making you aspire to a dream you can never reach. I'm going for a fantasy that I could never have, and I want to do everything in my power that I can to get there. So, if you see this continuation of using the three-tiered Christ to control Lucifer, and are constantly intermeshing, as far as I'm concerned, it's becoming one and the same creature. It's becoming one and the same power base. It's becoming one and the same spiritual base, because it's been mixed together for so long. And that's why you see this return, like in a Catholic church or any modern day church. You have the materialism, you have the greed, you have the domination, you have the power, and you see that these things are being developed. And that's how we see the right-hand path of gods. And I think that that is a culmination for those two constantly being interceded by men and their magical and spiritual practices.
So, my doctoral research focused on occult warfare beliefs, on the transmission of dualism from ancient Iran through Middle Eastern and ultimately Western esotericism up to contemporary times. Now, everything you've described sounds very much like a rather apocalyptic occult war process. So, you've mentioned a number of times in the conversation now a perspective on monotheism or Christianity. Obviously, tomorrow you're conducting a Black Mass, which is set in opposition to the Catholic practice and worldview. How does monotheism and Christianity, in your view, interact with this occult war between Ahriman and the Ahrimanism?
Well, when you look into the base study of the Catholic Church, it's bastardization of Mithraism. I don't say they pull all their tenets from there, but they're a lot. And so as far as I'm concerned, it's the same enemy that Ahrimans would fight against at the time. It's just in a different color, shade, different form. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm doing my job by attacking spiritually and religiously the enemy that's always been the enemy.
And so, in summary, what is the nature of that enemy? What, in your understanding, is Ahura Mazda?
Ahura Mazda is an entramping, authoritarian, and a slave driver. You are going to give me your material possessions. You are going to give me yourself. You are going to be my slave so you can attain this will of paradise that I offer you. That creates enslavement of the mind, enslavement of the morality, enslavement of the ethics of the person. And it also creates a tension within the being. Every being will have more and more tension because of them refuting to give into their animal nature. And this will continue to grow, continue to grow. This will create an anguish in somebody. It will create a pain. It will create guilt. It will create a lot of nastiness. And you'll see it when I say the devil when we do it, not necessarily. A demon may have coaxed you into deflating that teapot and letting all the steam out. I can agree with that. But they want so that once the demon has coaxed that out, they will do something and it will start to cycle back over. So that by the time the person dies and the soul gets to heaven, that's what feeds the Ahuras, that's what feeds the Ahura Mazda and the angelic being that nasty anguish because they live off of that anguish of the floor.
Now, where did these beings come from in your understanding? I mean, I'm aware that in what scholars think is the oldest form of Zoroastrianism, Ahriman and Ahura Mazda are regarded as two co-eternal opposed principles, whereas in later traditions they're both regarded as twin offspring of Zervan, a personification of the great womb of time. So I notice you reference Zervan in some of your work. Do you believe that Ahriman and Ahura Mazda have a common origin, or do you believe that they're eternally opposed?
No, in the Bible portion, I talk about this in the creation of mankind, more so the creation of the universe before mankind. I cannot pronounce the ancient Iranian version of the word, it's KW, and it goes on forever. But the equivalent is the Purusha. And as Zervan was making his sacrifices in the Purusha, he was focusing on something Muslim. As those sacrifices were occurring, as chunks were coming off of it, that's what was created in David. His self-doubt that the thing wasn't being created the devil, created art. So they're both festering in Purusha, being created, doing whatever it is that they were doing. And then at the time, the devil we call Namshai, also known as Shiva, tells Ahriman, whoever gets out first gets the keys to the kingdom. So he rips his way out of his own mother, creating the Big Bang, which now becomes the essence of the universe. Zervan grabs Ahriman, looks at him, thou art dark and stinking, and casts him off to the universe. And Ahriman came to be, and that's where the war begins, is because Ahriman was born second, but received all the keys to the kingdom. And when Ahriman was sent off on his own, and then the beginning of the law of vengeance starts with him wanting to take back the keys of the kingdom.
So, do you believe that you are actually reconstructing a practice of Ahrimanic tradition that occurred during Sasanian Persian times in the Zervanite Church, or against the Zervanite Church, or do you see this as a contemporary speculation on Ahrimanic practice?
I see this as a reconstruction of older ideals using newer forms of magic to create the proper environment to release the devil from his engagement.
So can you tell me something about these newer forms of magic? What kind of practices actually happen in your church?
Our base magic system is a revision of Notion magic, or Nokia magic. When I got a hold of the original Notion keys from Peter Kelly, they were rewritten into a way to work with the 57 calculators. We're obviously intertwined with 91 after the 33 angles that are, all of them are entwined with the 3 aethers and reach down into hell. So when we want to change reality, we want to make things in our favor, we will call upon those capital U's out of the different watchtowers. Now, depending on how much chaos or how much havoc or whatever it is we can create, that's what a watchtower is going to take it down. When we work with independent rituals and so forth, there's a lot of bastardized versions of philosophy to work on that spiritual nature, to work with independent things of their own. But in general, in group magic, our ceremonial understanding of how to manipulate energy and how to move energy at core is in Author Edward Wade's ideals of how to work ritual magic minus the using seals and sigils to manipulate your subconscious mind. We use other technological devices such as setting up the 5 mirrors to have strobe lights run through those 5 mirrors. We have Tesla foils creating different types of ions. The things that we put black noise and white noise into mixed with our music to create that co-density of the subconscious and conscious mind streaming into the collective conscious.
So you mentioned weight. Do you see what you're doing as a kind of diabolical theurgy?
It can be looked upon that way, but I believe it's more we are trying to allow the natural wave of destruction that's going regardless in the easiest form.
So why are you interested in Enochian magic? Is that because of its heritage in modern Satanism?
No. Enochian magic or Enochian magic is somehow, when you're looking through Donald Tyson's aspects and you compare it to the Book of Enoch, and I'm not talking about the OC scroll, I'm talking about the one of the books. ages, turning it into a diabolical magic if done properly, so that you can call out those Calco demons versus calling out the different angels to create the effect that you're looking for.
So, do you identify Ahriman with Karanza?
Yes.
And I've noticed in Tyson's work, he actually identifies Karanza with Lucifer. Do you take it that when Tyson says Lucifer, he actually means what you regard as the devil?
Well, yeah, because you have to look at the time period. When you're looking at John Dee and them, the Lucifer was considered the name for the devil because you had that large beginning, like Dante Albright, Milton, and those types of things that are influencing the concept of Lucifer being the devil.
So how much magical practice is actually done by members of your church? Is this something that everyone does? Is this something that only the clergy do?
Rituals, the clergy, and the membership of the church. The clergy run the rituals, obviously. But yes, they work manually. The workbook that has the transformative rituals is what brings them up to par with the practice of the ritual.
And so how many clergy are there in the church?
There are 2 fully ordained clergy, and there's 1 working towards ordaining them.
And how many clergy would you like to see? Do you seek to have a large priesthood? Do you prefer it to be a very small group?
I would like to have about 10 ordained priests running 10 different things.
And what's required for ordainment? How does someone become an Ahriman priest?
The first thing they have to prove is that they can get through the year.
And what kind of practices are in there?
There's a lot of meditation, a lot of crystal work, a lot of masturbatory work. There's also a lot of psychological work.
Masturbatory work. Can you say a little bit more about what that entails?
Okay, if you're going to have an exchange with the demon, they want the basal animal emotions. They want the adrenal effect in order to fuel them. If you give them rage, it's like giving them like rice. They'll burn through it pretty quickly, they'll get hungry again, and they're going to feed off of you real quick. You give them to them fear, you may as well be handing them 3 to a piece of crack. Because they love that fear and they're jittery and they're everywhere that they're just going to keep trying to scream, keep going. It's an addiction for them. If you feed them that lust energy, it's like giving them a steak. It's like giving them a protein that's going to last for a longer period of time, and they're going to be able to maintain how they work. So when we use the masturbatory behavior and we allow them to consume the energy of orgasm by focusing on them and concentrating on them and working energy to them, then you're giving them that energy in exchange for a favor you want them to do.
So does that mean that you prefer that kind of offering to, for example, blood sacrifice?
I don't understand why most folks would want to give, say, a self-blood sacrifice. I understand that traditionally the point of killing the animal is to get that adrenal release. And that's going to be that's going to be a mixture of both fear and rage. And again, those types of energies are only going to last for so long, and they're going to get jittery and fucking weird off of it too. So to us, we found it best to use the sexual energy to sustain them and allow them to have a more solid base of what they're doing.
So is there an influence in your tradition from voodoo gnosis, which I know also has similar views about the primacy of lust and sexual offerings?
It wasn't considered that much when formulating the thing. The learning about how to feed the demons came from my own personal workings, and then I actually found that after I discovered it myself.
So that's one correlation I noticed between your system and that system. Something else that came to mind in a previous conversation was when you were describing to me your perspective on the overcoming of the spirit by the soul. Now, I've noticed a similar motif in the work of the German philosopher Ludwig Klages, whose work has been quite influential on one of the branches of traditionalist voodoo gnosis as promoted by David Bath. Do you use Klages' work in a similar way? Do you see it as somehow important to either consume or process the influence of the spirits so that the soul will triumph in some kind of more carnal way?
I think we see the concept of the spirit and soul as two different things. The soul itself to me is like a tablet. This is the notebook. This is the shit. These are where your sins are collected. These are whenever you do positive things are collected. So when you approach the Shinhua Bridge, depending on how heavy your light that soul is, it depends on where you ascend decent. Because it's more like a tape recorder. The spirit itself, how I see it, is a subconscious mind. It is a thing that's learned. It is you. You are what evolved. That is the spirit within the self that is constantly learning and forever lives on. Obviously, the body dies. That's gone. So, one of our goals in using the traditional exorcism is to remove that tape recorder, to remove that tally tape. Take that thing out, because that's the thing that's either going to go to Zoro monsters or going to hell. So if we take the thing out and we feed it to the demons, it's gone. You no longer have a tally, and now you're free to do whatever the hell you need to do to get whatever you've done, so that when you pass on, the only thing that's left is the spirit and the body.
So you make a similar distinction that Klagas or that the Gnostic tradition might make, but your goal is opposite. You want to remove the soul and have only the spirit. I see. And do you connect that with Ahriman's original goal as a purely spiritual influence of wickedness?
Exactly, because if that soul is the piece of Ahura Mazda, he is the influx and the creator of all things. He expects that piece in return after he dies. So if he doesn't get that piece back, he's weak. Or if we can corrupt somebody's soul to the point that when he consumes it, it's now like a disease, he gets weaker.
What constitutes corruption?
Any type of what you would consider a mortal sin.
If I understood you correctly before, you don't subscribe to any view of absolute morality.
But if a person who's following Ahura Mazda does, and if he's tallying that sin on his soul through his own guilt, which is the inclination of the teapot that we were talking about earlier.
So you're suggesting that Ahura Mazda feeds off of guilt?
Yes. Guilt, anguish, and blood.
So, could you say something about your ritual tools here?
Well, mostly it's set up for the Black Mass because that's what we've been working on for over 3 months now. Obviously, we have the Athame, which is for controlling demonic spirits.
Is there a particular reason that there's a scorpion on the hilt?
Because the scorpion is a druid. So therefore, it's a demonic tool charge. The pedestal of the Satanic Star of Victory is usually held by the chalice. We use different chalice. Normally like that's for the Black Mass, the communion crap we don't even mess with in our normal rituals. We don't even mess with the elixir of ecstasy. The chamber pot and the dildo are normal aspects of it. The oil burner usually is. The idols usually are. The candlesticks usually
Now what about this idol of a lion-headed figure who has wings and is encircled with a serpent? Who is that?
That is normally seen as Ahriman, but there are scholastic and educationalistic arguments on whether that's Ahriman or not. To us, as far as I'm concerned.
What's he holding?
That is the head of the Archangel Michael that we did the destruction of the particular entity. So I don't know who thought it was cute to put it in there, but it's been there for a while, so I guess it's going to stay.
Now, what do you mean when you say that you've destroyed an entity? Was this a kind of iconoclastic ritual against Michael, or do you regard that you have actually destroyed Michael?
As far as we are concerned, we've destroyed Michael. I don't know where the cards are. Germany, in fact, through history, has created the double squared helix trapping device, much like the demonic symbol of traveling with the triangle. It's actually done with a double square because of their hermaphrodite nature. Then, along with that, the proper date has been placed
now
to trap that.
Is the destruction of other entities a regular feature of your ritual practice?
If we feel it is necessary, obviously Mithra was necessary. Obviously, since they wanted to keep calling down the power of the great Saint Angel Marcos, whatever the fuck its name is, We decided that in opposition to children that we don't give a shit, we decided to destroy the defender. And when you actually get into studies, you'll see, and we talk about it in the Bible corruption, that there are two eyes of God, one being Vishnu, the other being Mithra. And so we were going to end up destroying what Archangel Michael being Vishnu as far as we are concerned. Anyway, the timing was right. The fact that they were going to pull their last big to-do on a Saturday evening, which is actually the lunar cycle in which Michael is the weakest, and that's why we attacked with that.
And so, what kinds of methods would you use in this type of, would it be correct to call it spiritual warfare?
Sure.
What kind of methods would you use in spiritual warfare practice?
You're going to start your normal ritual, get energy moving, summon the demons that you want specifically, send them into the dead house of song, pull who you want out, and put it into the idol likeness of itself, destroy it. And then they consume the energy that is dispersed from the destruction of that idol.
And so what do you believe happens when other people actually summon the entities that you are seeking to destroy?
It's just like how we feel about God, it's dead. God died for us to be a man.
So, do you see God as something different from Ahura Mazda?
I think the populace sees God something different from Ahura Mazda. And since it is the majority who controls how reality is ran, that is what God is in their eyes, so therefore that's how it reacts in reality. Whether you know the truth of it or not, does give you some power over it. But if it is destroyed in your mind, it is destroyed in how you've done things, and it can no longer affect you.
So ultimately, you see the use of these kind of occult warfare practices as to the individual or personal benefit of the practitioner?
The practitioner is a group, the practitioner is with, that is conducting.
So do you expect to also see effects in the surrounding world or society, or do you focus entirely on the experience of yourself and your group?
When I do a destruction ritual of the deity, I expect to change reality. And as far as I'm concerned, that destruction of that deity help fuel and maintain our ability to move forward with the Black Mass.
That's exactly what I was just about to ask you about. What changes in reality do you intend to further by the performance of the public Black Mass?
Well, in our eyes, we've destroyed the Protector, and we have destroyed their judger. In other words, their ability to judge all of mankind, their ability to protect mankind no longer exists. We will be celebrating that concept with the Black Mass. The Black Mass, on a whole, is creating a large world-spread cognitive dissonance. Because now people have to confront the concept of the devil when you're God. With that cognitive dissonance on a worldwide scale, if the microism reflects the macroism, then if I'm able to take majority of the people within the microism and crack their concept of reality with cognitive dissonance, then therefore that cracking should occur in the macroorganism where we can crack that concept of reality. Once that is shattered, like anybody who's ever truly experienced a traumatic event, they have to recreate that egotistical bubble of protection in order to maintain living in a chaotic world. So if we're cracking the foundation of the macroism because of the cracking of all the microism, then it's going to take a serious whole type of reconstruction to recreate that defense.
And why is that desirable?
Because that begins the downfall of man.
So do you see any risk or danger in engaging in a practice that basically has anti-human intentions? Do you regard yourself as separate from the state or the rest of humanity, or do you see this as a risk worth taking?
I see it as I don't give a shit. You have to understand, the majority of us who come to this church, we no longer give a fuck. And I see that time and time again. The records we get together because we no longer care. If we die in the process of the destruction, it's an acceptable loss to us.
But earlier you did suggest that you are basically self-interested and seek to advance the aims of yourself and your close clan or kin group. So how do you reconcile a basically self-interested posture with pursuing occult war or spiritual warfare aims that could result in your personal destruction?
Because my spiritual life and my worldly life are two different things.
So when you say self-interest, you're talking about your spiritual self-interest.
Yes.
So if you were to summarize in conclusion the nature of your spiritual self-interest, what you really most desire and seek to achieve through Ahrimanic practice, what is that?
The desire that we wish to see through Ahrimanic practice is a destruction of a large corrupted society so that we can recreate a smaller, close-knit society that works for the interest of itself instead of the interest of the individual.
So ultimately you're anti-individualist as well as anti-humanist?
No. I agree that the individual should have his own needs met, but should also work with the community that he lives in order to keep the community moving forward along with the self moving forward.
So you're rejecting both extreme individualism and extreme collectivism?
Yes, sir.
And you also said that you don't particularly care if you die in the process. So what do you expect to happen spiritually when you die?
I know for a fact that I'm predestined to go to hell. I've been sure I've blasphemed every single fucking word I've got.
So what is it like in hell?
To me, hell is a watery abyss. If we choose to go there by serving Ahriman, we are going there to recollect ourselves. I guess the best way to describe it would be the Japanese concept of bardo.
So, do you expect to then be reborn?
Yes, we definitely fully believe in reincarnation until the devil's task is done.
And at that point, no one will need to be incarnate?
At that point, we don't know what's going to happen.
So, if I understand correctly, your post-mortem cosmology involves intermittent successive rebirths in a cosmos that you're actually trying to destroy.
Yes.
To be replaced either by something better, or you're not sure, but it has to be better than this?
Yes.
Well, that would seem like a rather complete note to end on. I hope I can look forward to another interview if more questions should arise, perhaps after the performance of the Black Mass tomorrow. But I really thank you for taking the time to explain your worldview to me and some of your practices in such detail. In addition to further interviews, I'm hoping to follow up this investigation by writing this research in the form of one or more articles, hopefully to be published along with either other selections in the academic study of Satanism, or perhaps pieces on the development of minority religious movements in times of change and uncertainty, particularly with reference to how those kind of beliefs and processes interact with dualism, antagonist projections, and occult warfare beliefs, all of which were represented and expressed in this fascinating interview. So thank you for listening or watching, and thank you again for your time. I'm hoping that I can also interview some other members of the church. So goodbye for now. Thank you.